My coworker claimed my project as his, and I didn't say a word. Not in the meeting, not in the hallway afterward. I even nodded like I agreed with him because I knew something most people don't. If you argue in public, you look emotional. If you stay quiet, people assume you're weak. And if you stay quiet on purpose, you can let someone talk themselves into a corner they can't climb out of. This happened last year at a mid-sized tech services company, big enough to have legal and compliance, small enough that everyone still pretended we were a family. I was a project lead in delivery, the kind of role where you're accountable for outcomes, but you don't get the spotlight unless something goes wrong. I liked it that way. I'd been there 4 years, steady performance, no drama, and I was finally lined up for a promotion to senior lead. Nothing was signed, but I'd had the conversations. My director had said the words, "Keep doing what you're doing." Then I got assigned a project that actually mattered. It started as an internal request from sales. A new enterprise client wanted a proof of concept in 3 weeks. If we nailed it, it turned into a multi-year deal. If we missed it, the client walked, and sales ate it. The client was picky, regulated, and allergic to vague promises. Exactly the type that demanded real work instead of polished slides. The project itself was messy in a way that doesn't sound dramatic unless you've lived it. Multiple data sources, a timeline that assumed miracles, stakeholders who used the phrase "should be simple," like a weapon, and a deliverable that had to be both technically correct and safe enough to show the client without setting off their security team. I took it seriously because I could see the angle immediately. If the proof of concept worked, sales got their win, the company got their deal, and I'd have a concrete, undeniable result attached to my name. Not team player fluff, a real thing. I built it the way I always do, boring, clean, documented. I wrote the technical approach, scheduled the internal working sessions, assigned tasks where it made sense, and did the parts I couldn't delegate because they were high risk. I looped in our security analyst early so we didn't get surprised at the end. I kept meeting notes. I kept version history. Every decision had a reason. The coworker in this story, let's call him Ryan, wasn't on my team. He was a solutions consultant, which in our world meant he floated between sales and delivery, talked a lot in meetings, and framed himself as the bridge between what clients wanted and what we could build. He was good at first impressions, always had the right buzzwords, always knew which executive to tag in a message so it looked like momentum. He dressed like he was on his way to an interview for a better job. Ryan joined one of my early working sessions, uninvited but not technically wrong for being there. He said he wanted to help align the narrative. That was his favorite phrase, align the narrative. At the time, I didn't mind. It's normal for sales-adjacent people to hover when a deal is in motion. I assumed he'd sit back, maybe ask questions, and then disappear once he had what he needed. Instead, he started inserting himself into everything. Small at first. He'd reword my updates in the group chat as if he was translating for leadership. He'd message people privately asking for the same information I'd already requested in the project channel, then repost it like he'd gathered it himself. If I scheduled a meeting, he'd send a quick summary afterward with his name at the bottom. It was irritating, but I still didn't see the endgame. In my head, the work was the work. Anyone watching could see who was driving it. That was my first mistake, assuming visibility is automatic. 2.5 weeks in, we ran the internal demo. I showed the proof of concept working end-to-end, data in, logic applied, output clean and consistent. Security had signed off on the approach. We had answers for the client's likely objections. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid. The room went quiet in that good way, like people were recalculating their expectations upward. My director nodded once and said, "Okay, this is real." Sales immediately booked the client demo for the next day. That's the night I stayed late polishing the last 10%. Not because I wanted it perfect, but because in regulated spaces, small sloppiness becomes big distrust. I checked logs, cleaned up labels, tightened the documentation. I went home tired but satisfied, like I'd done something that could actually change my year. The client demo was on Zoom at 10 a.m. It was me, my director, a sales lead, 2 engineers, our security analyst, and Ryan. He wasn't supposed to present. That was explicitly agreed in the internal prep. I'd walk the client through what we built. Security would address controls. Sales would handle commercial questions. Ryan was there to support. The meeting started normal. Small talk. The client's program manager introduced her team. Their security guy didn't smile once. I was ready. Then my director did that thing leaders do when they think they're helping. He said, "Before we jump in, I want to thank Ryan for pulling this together so quickly." I felt it like a cold drop in my stomach because I knew exactly what had just happened. Not malicious on my director's part, just assumption. Ryan was the person who had been the loudest in email threads. Ryan was the one who aligned the narrative. Ryan was sitting there looking calm and prepared, and Ryan didn't correct him. He leaned forward, smiled like he was being modest, and said, "Happy to. We moved fast on this because we know how important it is for you." We. The client nodded like that explained everything. My director looked relieved, like he'd assigned ownership, and it stuck. Sales looked excited because sales doesn't care who builds it as long as it sells. I sat there with my cursor hovering over share screen, and for a half second I considered interrupting. Just a simple factual correction, something like, "To clarify, I led the build and I'll walk you through it." But I didn't, because I could already see the trap forming. If I corrected him in front of the client, Ryan could play offended. Leadership could see it as internal politics. The client could read it as disorganization. And if the deal was as fragile as we all claimed, nobody would forgive me for making it weird. So I shared my screen. I delivered the demo. I answered the questions. I explained design decisions I'd made at midnight the night before. And every time the client reacted positively, Ryan nodded as if he'd expected it, like it matched his plan. When the client's program manager said, "This is exactly the direction we were hoping for," Ryan said, "Great, then we're aligned." And my director smiled at him. I kept my voice steady. I kept my pace controlled. I finished the demo without a single stumble, and when the meeting ended, my director said, "Nice job, Ryan. Really?" Ryan turned to me, still smiling, and said, "Good execution." Like I was the hands, like he was the mind. I muted my mic, stared at my own reflection in the dark square of my webcam, and realized something I didn't want to admit. The lie wasn't the problem. The speed at which everyone accepted it was. I left my laptop open and didn't move for a full minute. Then I opened the project folder on our shared drive and started exporting everything I'd written, built, and approved. Quietly, methodically, like I was packing a bag before the fire alarm even went off. By the next morning, the story had already shifted. Not officially, nothing was written down, but the way people spoke told me everything. Ryan was suddenly the point person. Messages that used to start with, "Can you see," now started with, "Looping Ryan in." My calendar invites still existed, but replies came slower. Decisions I used to make unilaterally now came back with gentle resistance, like I'd overstepped without being told. It wasn't loud. That's what made it dangerous. Ryan didn't announce himself as the owner of the project. He let other people do it for him. In meetings, he'd say things like, "When we decided to take that approach," or "the rationale here was," and then glance briefly in my direction as if daring me to interrupt. He never lied outright. He reframed, he summarized, he contextualized, and every time he spoke, the distance between the truth and the accepted version grew a little wider. I tested the waters once. In a follow-up meeting with internal leadership, I referred to the build as the solution I put together with the team. Ryan didn't contradict me. He smiled and added, "Yes, and from a solutions perspective, what we wanted was..." Then he talked for 3 minutes straight, long enough for my sentence to feel irrelevant by the time he finished. After that, I stopped testing. Instead, I watched. I watched how he positioned himself between me and decision makers. If I sent an update, he'd reply, all 5 minutes later with a quick clarification that wasn't wrong, just unnecessary. And now his name was the last one people saw. If I scheduled a working session, he'd ask whether it was still needed, then suggest a shorter sync he could facilitate. If leadership asked a technical question in a meeting, he'd answer first with confidence, then look at me like I was backup, and the worst part was that it worked. Not because he was better at the work. He wasn't. He couldn't rebuild what I'd made if you locked him in a room with the documentation. But he understood something I'd underestimated. Ownership isn't assigned by effort. It's assigned by perception. By the end of that week, the client had sent a glowing email. They wanted to move forward. Contracts were being drafted. Sales was celebrating quietly. Leadership was suddenly very interested in the vision behind the solution. Ryan was invited to a meeting. I wasn't. That's when the irritation turned into something heavier. Not anger, clarity. I pulled up the project timeline and read it like an outsider. Every decision point, every approval, every moment where someone could later say, "That wasn't actually yours." I asked myself an uncomfortable question. If this went wrong tomorrow, who would they blame? The answer wasn't Ryan. It would be me, because I was still the one doing the actual delivery. That night, I stayed late again, not to work, but to audit. I went through email threads and saved the ones where I'd proposed the architecture and gotten buy-in. I pulled meeting notes where action items had my name next to them. I exported the commit history with timestamps. I downloaded the initial request from sales that had come directly to me. I didn't annotate anything. I didn't highlight. I just preserved it exactly as it existed. It felt paranoid. It also felt necessary. The following Monday, Ryan sent a message that crossed a line so cleanly I almost respected it. He wrote, "Going forward, I'll be the primary contact for the client on this initiative. Loop me in on any changes so we can stay aligned." Not we. Him. No one pushed back. No one questioned it. Someone reacted with a thumbs-up emoji. I stared at that message longer than I should have. Part of me wanted to reply immediately, to correct the record, to force a conversation. But another part, the part that had been quietly tracking patterns, knew exactly how that would play out. I'd be emotional, territorial, not collaborative. So I did something that surprised even me. I agreed. I replied, "Sounds good." From that moment on, I stopped trying to be seen. I kept doing my job, but I narrowed my communication. I answered questions precisely. I stopped volunteering extra context. I documented everything internally and shared only what was required externally. If Ryan wanted to speak for the project, I let him. Because the more he spoke, the more he committed to a version of events he couldn't support. And I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost him everything. The breaking point didn't come with shouting or threats. It came with a meeting invite I wasn't on. I found out by accident. One of the engineers forwarded me a calendar screenshot, asking if the timing still worked for our client alignment. My name wasn't there. Ryan's was. So was my director's. So was legal. Legal doesn't show up unless something is about to become binding. I didn't respond right away. I opened the project folder instead and stared at the structure like I was seeing it for the first time. Everything that mattered, architecture decisions, risk assessments, implementation notes, was still owned by me, not informally, formally. My name was on the documents. My approvals were in the system. My timestamps were everywhere. And yet none of that mattered if the story calcified before the contract was signed. I joined the meeting late, off camera, muted. No one questioned it. Ryan was already talking. He was explaining his approach to scalability, using words that sounded right if you didn't know the internals. The client's security lead interrupted him twice with precise questions. Ryan answered smoothly but shallowly, circling without landing. Each time, there was a pause, just long enough that someone might jump in. I didn't. I listened. When the meeting ended, my director sent a brief follow-up. Good discussion. Let's tighten a few items before final review. No mention of me, no tasks assigned, no ownership clarified. That was the moment something shifted. Not emotionally, strategically. I stopped thinking in terms of credit. I started thinking in terms of risk. Because in regulated deals, ownership isn't just ego, it's liability. Whoever claims authorship also claims responsibility. And Ryan had been very clear, very public about where he stood. That afternoon, I scheduled a quiet one-on-one with the security analyst I'd looped in weeks earlier. Not to complain, to verify. I asked what assumptions had been shared with the client about data handling and access controls. She pulled up her notes. They matched what I'd designed, not what Ryan had just described. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I checked the draft contract. I had access because I was still listed as the technical owner in the system. Buried in the clauses were references to implementation specifics, language that assumed certain controls, certain audit trails, certain boundaries. All of them mapped cleanly to my design. None of them mapped to Ryan's version. That was the realization. If his narrative became official, the contract would be wrong. And if the contract was wrong, the deal wouldn't survive diligence. That night, I didn't save more emails. I didn't export more files. I already had enough. Instead, I wrote one clean summary for myself. No adjectives, no accusations, just facts. What was built, why it was built that way, who approved it, and where the public narrative diverged. I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, Ryan messaged me directly for the first time in days. Hey, client wants a deeper dive on the solution rationale. Can you send me something I can walk them through? He wasn't asking for help. He was asking for cover. I looked at the message, then at my summary, then at the contract draft still open on my screen. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel cornered. I felt ahead. I replied, happy to explain it directly. Let me know when works. There was a long pause. Then, I'll get back to you. And then silence. The kind that means something's gone wrong. The call I made wasn't dramatic. No confrontation, no speech. I didn't even mention Ryan's name. I waited until late afternoon when calendars loosen and people answer out of habit instead of strategy. Then I called the one person everyone in this deal listened to without arguing, the client's compliance manager. We'd been introduced weeks earlier during a routine security check, back when I was still, officially, the technical lead. She wasn't a friend. She wasn't an ally. She was just precise, and precision is dangerous to lies. I kept it short. I told her I wanted to confirm alignment between the draft contract language and the actual implementation, before anything went final. I said I was concerned there might be a disconnect between how the solution was being described and how it was built. I didn't accuse. I didn't hint at internal conflict. I framed it as risk mitigation. She thanked me. She asked for documentation. I sent exactly what I'd already prepared. Architecture notes, control mappings, approval trails, clean, boring, verifiable. That was it. I didn't follow up. I didn't warn anyone internally. I went back to my work like nothing had changed. The first ripple came the next morning. A meeting invite popped up titled, Clarification Sync, Urgent, Legal, Sales, my director, Ryan, and me. Ryan joined late. He started confidently like always, but the room felt different. The compliance manager asked pointed questions, not hostile, just specific. She referenced line items from the contract and asked how they were satisfied in practice. Ryan answered once, twice, then hesitated. He glanced at me. I didn't rescue him. I answered when asked, calmly, referencing the documents she already had. Every answer matched what she'd reviewed. Every explanation landed exactly where the contract language expected it to. There was no explosion. No gotcha. Just a slow realization spreading across the call that two different stories had been told, and only one of them was real. Sales went quiet, first. Legal followed. My director stopped nodding. Then the compliance manager said the sentence that changed everything. Before we proceed, we'll need to pause until ownership and implementation responsibility are formally clarified. As it stands, we can't sign off. The deal didn't collapse loudly. It stalled. And in corporate terms, that's worse. The call ended early. Immediately after, my director messaged me privately. Can you jump on for a quick chat? This time Ryan wasn't invited. My director didn't yell. He didn't apologize either. He asked questions. I answered them. I showed him the same facts I'd shown compliance. I explained without emotion how the narrative had drifted and why it mattered. I didn't ask for credit. I asked for correction. He leaned back in his chair and stayed quiet for a long time. That afternoon, ownership was reassigned in the system, officially, quietly. Ryan was removed from client-facing responsibilities, effective immediately. The compliance hold was lifted 2 days later, once documentation was reissued under the correct name. Ryan never confronted me. He didn't need to. His access faded first, then his meetings, then his authority. Within a month, he transferred teams. Within a quarter, he was gone. The deal closed without fanfare. No celebration, no apology tour. Just accuracy restored. And for the first time since this started, the silence felt earned. After everything settled, I expected to feel victorious. I didn't. What I felt was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm passes without hitting your house directly. No cheers, no adrenaline, just the steady realization that something dangerous is no longer circling you. The project moved forward under my name, but nobody made a speech about it. Leadership didn't suddenly praise my integrity. There was no acknowledgement of what almost went wrong. And that was fine. The work continued, clean and focused. The client relationship stabilized once communication flowed through a single consistent source. Meetings became shorter. Questions became clearer. The solution stopped being a vision and started being what it always was, a functional system built for real constraints. A few weeks later, my director called me into his office. No agenda, no preamble. He said, "You handled that correctly." Then he added, after a pause, "I should have noticed earlier." That was it. No apology. No promise to do better. Just an admission that mattered because it changed how he treated me afterward. I was pulled into decisions sooner, asked before assumptions were made. When I spoke in meetings, people listened without needing a louder voice to validate it. Ryan's name stopped coming up entirely. Not in blame, not in gossip. He just evaporated from relevance. The company didn't punish him publicly. They didn't need to. Once his credibility cracked, the role he'd built for himself couldn't exist anymore. He depended on momentum and perception, and once those turned against him, there was nothing underneath to hold him up. A month later, someone mentioned casually that he'd taken a position elsewhere. No one asked where. The promotion conversation happened not long after. This time it wasn't vague. HR followed up. Dates were set. Numbers were discussed. The title changed, but more importantly, the dynamic did. I wasn't fighting to be seen anymore. I was already there. Looking back, the strangest part isn't that he tried to take credit. That happens everywhere. The strange part is how close it came to working, and how easily it would have if I'd reacted the way people expect. If I'd argued. If I'd confronted him in front of others. If I'd tried to clear things up emotionally instead of structurally. I didn't win because I exposed him. I won because I let the system do what it always does when it's given accurate information. It corrected itself. That experience changed how I work. I still collaborate. I still trust people. But I don't confuse visibility with ownership anymore, and I don't assume good outcomes protect the people who created them. I document. I align. I make sure reality has a paper trail. Not because I'm paranoid, because silence, when used deliberately, is a form of leverage. And sometimes the most effective response isn't saying your name louder, it's letting someone else say it wrong. long enough that the truth has time to catch up.